Hi, everyone. Joining me today on the podcast is Pete Tiliakos. Pete is a longtime HR and payroll industry expert. He's got a lot of experience from customers, consulting, on the software vendor side, industry researcher, you name it, he's got the experience. So I followed Pete on social media for some time and recently even got the chance to meet him and talk at the American Payroll Association Congress. I'm really excited to have him here. He's a true industry expert who's really on top of the future trends in this space. Thanks for joining me today, Pete.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. I really love the show.
Yeah, so there was recently a session at the virtual American Payroll Association. I think it was like a few weeks ago, and it was on cryptocurrency. And I saw your post on social about it, and I was interested, and so I decided to attend. And I thought it was a really good session, and the presenters also made it pretty easy to understand, even for someone who doesn't really know anything about crypto. For me, I've been involved in the Web3 space for many years, and it's a big area of interest for me. I follow it closely. I'm always looking at these things. And I'll definitely say it's early days and it's far from being mainstream, but I'm starting to see more questions on this. I'm sure you are as well. So what were some of your takeaways from that virtual American Payroll Association session, Pete?
Yeah, no doubt. I enjoyed that session. I'll be honest with you. It was one that I had eyed on the agenda all along. And look, thanks to American Payroll Association for stepping into some of these, more I don't want to say controversial, but maybe more confusing, if you will, kind of topics. And I love that they brought that into the virtual Congress. I think the way I would position it is it felt a lot like kind of a 101 class on crypto for the payroll practitioner. And the gentleman that did that podcast, I thought they did, or excuse me, presentation, I thought they did a really phenomenal job of breaking it down for the average person. So if anyone's interested, I would always suggest that you check that out and any of the content on the APA's virtual Congress. But yeah, I came away with a few learnings, to be honest with you. There were some things that I just wasn't all that aware of. Certainly one thing obviously is demand is rising amongst a range of adopters, right? And now employers are really needing to kind of accommodate that, right? We're living in this age of maximum flexibility, and employers are having to compete with other employers who are doing these, accommodating these things. So I think it's really timely.
Right.
I did learn that there are multiple ways of paying or facilitating that. With what I would say is probably the cleanest option being a third-party provider. There's a few out there. I know there's probably more coming online, but that was one of the things I came away with. The fact that process is quite a bit less risky in the fact that you are sort of using this intermediary to help you out and facilitating it. And then, of course, as we know, the Fed and state laws are certainly growing, and it's something that we've obviously seen an executive order come from the White House to explore these things in our own economy. Potentially maybe even bring in a digital currency tied to our fiat, our U.S. dollar. But the reality of it is I think that, and as we've seen, these things are hyper volatile, right? There is swings up and down every day, every minute sometimes as to what's going on. And I think some of that legislation is aiming to keep people protected, right? Put a little bit more security and a little bit more protection around people getting involved in it. I think the other thing that I learned, I didn't know this, interestingly, the IRS actually deems crypto or virtual currency. I don't think they use the term crypto. They treat that as a digital asset, right? More so as property and less so as money,
Right.
which it still has a monetary value, still has a tax impact. But at the end of the day, this is a very, very polarizing sort of topic for sure. And look, I think that with anything that's disruptive, right, whether it's cryptocurrencies, whether it's blockchain, whatever, it's always going to sort of come with a certain amount of buzz and a sort of amount of angst for certain people. And then when you see what we're all going through right now with what I've seen the media call the crypto winter, the swings in volatility daily and hourly, and a lot of people in some cases losing money has, I think, really polarized it even more. And with anything like that, right? And I think you can see this when you read about the topic or you look at comments on Twitter or LinkedIn. It seems to be pretty much divided, right? People are either all in or all out. It's either fool's gold or it's the future, right? And
Right.
so I think but you probably have the majority of the population somewhere in the middle that doesn't really have enough knowledge, or maybe they don't have enough experience or even enough interest to go and kind of figure it out. And so I think most people are probably taking a very wait and see kind of approach. And, look, with anything that is new and innovative, right, there's always going to be those people who are on board and say it's the thing. And there's going to be people who are going to say it's not. We saw that with the internet a little bit in the beginning. Now look at us, right? We're all just living with the internet. You definitely have seen that a lot with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And there probably is still a lot of that around AI and ML. And now I think Web3 and certainly metaverse and even more importantly, like blockchain and other sort of digital native solutions are creating the same angst, right? And where I think crypto kind of plays a role is that, a lot of people, some people see it as an investment, some people see it as a monetary instrument.
Right.
And what is interesting, right, is that they've kind of become both. And so it's certainly an asset that some folks are looking to for the future to build value. If that, that's certainly debatable in some circles. You could say that that's hard to do when it's not really tied to any sort of commodity. So it is risky right now, and it is very much disruptive. And there, who knows which way it's going to go at this point. But what I will say is that I think that, will crypto be the predominant currency in the future? We'll have to wait and see. But I do believe that digital native currencies, right, or some form of digital payment is really where we are heading. And the underlying technology of that is going to remain blockchain. There is a lot of value in blockchain and what it can do for a number of different the financial system, for security of things. And I think it'll certainly be it remain the foundation for the metaverse and Web3. But if you look across our own personal lives, and I know when we went to the APA out in Vegas, right? I remember making 3 transactions that day, one in the airport, I think, and then like a couple more once I got there. And all 3 of them, I was denied giving cash, right? Each time they wanted a digital payment, right? They wanted a credit card, or they wanted my phone, or whatever it was. And so I think that's really telling, right? Like that's where it's going, right? How many times do you get into moments where your friends or even people you're around, nobody carries cash in a lot of cases, right? It's not uncommon. And so I think that the whole normalizing of digital currencies and even crypto into our economy, means that it has, and it's going to continue to make its way into the workplace, and employers are going to have to watch this, because I think it is fundamentally something that employees in small pockets now, but eventually will want to have as part of their, employee experience, if you will, part of their flexibility, in shaping their experience with that employer. And I think employers are really going to have to pay attention to this and start figuring out how to accommodate it to be competitive.
Yeah, I agree. And so you said quite a lot there. And so there's a couple of things I want to unpack on and kind of expand on, right? It's clear there's more questions coming in, right? As you mentioned, most people are kind of in the middle, where it's this kind of different, scary thing that I don't really know about it. I don't know how it works. I don't understand the technology, like a lot of these other things that you're mentioning, blockchain, they feel more like buzzwords, and it's a new scary thing, right? And the other thing you're seeing news headlines that often come, right? And that comes from, when Bitcoin or other cryptos go up, a significant amount, or they come down a significant amount, right? We talked about the crypto winter, and right now they have come down, and we've kind of seen these things being cyclical. But the reality is that there's definitely going to be risks there due to the volatility, and this just cuts both ways, right? We've heard examples of people making a lot of money and taking it and being set for life and buying crypto who made 100x on their initial investment, but it does cut both ways, right? There's been like some high profile politicians and athletes who've been asked to be paid in Bitcoin. And I saw, when you look at it in today's currency and value, they've lost hundreds of thousands or millions, right? I saw one example of a tweet about NFL player Odell Beckham. I think he took his Rams salary, $750,000 in Bitcoin, and at that time it was around 64,000, and with today's price it's around 20. So he's gotten about a third of what it was, And so this is, I know, a big area of discussion from the payroll practitioners, and trying to understand the legalities around it too, right? Because you talked about how the governments are starting to address this. And it's also clear that different countries are at much different places. You mentioned the U.S. and some of the IRS topics, and the White House has made the announcement of looking into this a little bit. Whereas if you look at other countries with El Salvador, for example, and how they made it as a legal tender, right? So depending upon where you live, and that's going to change, and different governments are going to adopt it at different paces as well. But the reality is, for the short term, I don't think any of the risks associated with it are going anywhere. So with that being said, what are your thoughts on the risks associated with volatility, especially for a company considering maybe paying their people and offering this as a way to pay their people?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and it's just to your point. I think I was reading the other day, the mayor of New York, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it's the governor, I
Right.
believe the mayor,
Yeah.
he's taking his pay in cryptocurrency, maybe Bitcoin. So
Yep.
yeah, and you certainly have a lot of governments, right, trying to figure this out. Our own government is exploring that. I think we were talking before the show that something like 90, I believe I read, countries are now in some level of exploration. So yeah, this definitely isn't going away, and employers, have to look at this. And you're right, the risk is the part that they have to manage. And I think given the rise in the adoption and the incremental but sort of growing demand that you're seeing from employees wanting to have payroll, and even sometimes their 401k or retirements funds put into cryptocurrencies, more employers are having to sort of start to solve for this, right? And so, now with the employee experience really being the point of differentiation, right, around attracting, competing
Right.
for, and acquiring top talent, you've got to have that sort of hyper personalized, ultimate flexibility kind of attitude, if you will, and culture, right, in approaching these employees, right? And that means when we say flexibility, it really means the choice of shaping their experience around the roles, the projects, maybe the schedule they work, maybe and particularly where they work, right? We've seen work from anywhere really become kind of the new trend. But also the frequency and the modality of pay. And that's where I think you're seeing things like earned wage access and now even crypto entering the equation. And some employees, and particularly in younger populations who've grown up with these digital native solutions, are really saying, hey, I want my pay in this. And you've got all generations I've met that are putting some money into these things at different levels. And so, with that in mind, you've got employers now looking to accommodate that sort of freedom of choice, if you will, trying to create that flexibility. And they're fundamentally entering into a very, they're exposing their organizations and themselves to some volatility and inherent, disruptive innovation. And so I think employers want to accommodate employees and meet them where they prefer, and give that flexibility, but they also have that obligation to still reduce the risk for both their business and ultimately the employee.
Yeah.
And especially with employee and with wellness, total wellness, and financial wellness being a big part of that, and its negative impacts to both the employee but also the business. You've got to really make sure that whatever you are going to do is going to protect that employee and right. We saw the paychecks who've been the celebrities who've taken paychecks and then potentially lost some of their value. And so with all that volatility, it's hard today to really guarantee that the payment made in crypto owed through the net pay value at the time of receipt and access is actually the same it's going to be by the time the employee gets it. So, for example, right, if I owe you $1,000 at 8 a.m. on Friday, is it going to be the same $1,000 in 2 hours, in 12 hours, in 24 hours? And so, because no one can really say it's risky, right? There's, employees are taking a risk, employers are taking a risk. And so, understandably, I think most employers are going to lean towards more traditional approaches of providing employees their pay, right?
Yep.
Going to the direct deposit, a bank account, your pay card, or maybe even offering them earned wage access for a digital wallet. And then saying, look, if you want to go and invest, and I'm air quoting that, right? If you want to go and leverage those assets, those crypto purchases on a commercial platform, you're welcome to, but we as an employer want to kind of stay out of that. But again, going back to that whole flexibility, if employees want that option, I think that, if you're going to take that step and you're going to offer that and you're going to fund your net pay in crypto, There are certainly safe options to do that, and pros and cons to every side of taking it on yourself versus maybe having a third party. But what I think we learned from the APA event was fundamentally that doing a third party route and getting an intermediary is really the least risky and safest way to handle that.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit, right? And I think when you look at payroll overall, they're a pretty risk adverse function in the business, right? They're not
Mhm.
trying to take too many risks, and of course they're looking at it, right? They're reducing the risk, like you said, for the business and the employee, right? So that $1,000 example you used, I think the employee is super happy if it's 1,200, but if it's 800, they're going to come kicking and screaming, right? And so that's just something that is the reality. And so if you look at it, the employees who are interested in doing this type of thing and getting paid in cryptocurrency, the reality is they could very simply just get their payment to their bank account. And then it's gotten so easy to open an account with any number of platforms, whether it's Coinbase or Gemini or Binance or whatever. And you can buy the cryptocurrencies directly with your bank account, right? And a lot of times
Yes.
you can
Yep.
begin trading it right away. And this actually gives you some level of flexibility in one, choosing the crypto exchange platform that you want to use, as opposed to if I'm doing this through my employer, then it's kind of being I'm having to do this with the if we're using the third party that they choose, or then I'm going to have to transfer it anyways, right? So then it's still a two-step process. But I want to get into that a little more, right? So one, I could easily make a recurring buy too if I buy it myself. So there's not anything associating my buy with my employer, which to many people that could be a positive thing. But on the other side of it, and the primary reason a company might consider offering it is to make it easier for their people that do and make it something they offer as more of a benefit and to your earlier comment, like an employee experience thing.
Right. Right.
However, the reality is many employers are going to be hesitant in paying people in cryptocurrencies. And when I was engaging in the chat in that APA session, I saw the reactions, right? I saw
Oh yeah.
the payroll admins, and there was a lot of concerns there. There's a lot of fears there, and it might be something that interests companies who are already in the Web3 space or on the cutting edge of things. But for now, from what I saw, both at the in-person APA in Las Vegas, I didn't see a lot of enthusiasm from the practitioners for wanting to do this, and logistically, I understand their concerns, right?
Yeah. Very risk adverse crowd.
For sure, for sure. So it'd have to be a top-down initiative. But if it is, and the company decides to do this, right? We started digging into this a little bit, but maybe they want to be the first in their industry to offer it and offer it as an employee benefit. But the APA session talked about two ways of actually accomplishing this. So I've decided I want to do this. Okay, how do I go about it? And so the first one is an employer wallet, and that's where the company pays it from their own holdings of a cryptocurrency. So I have this holding, and I'm going to do that. And so for me, this is going to be a non-starter to most, and I have a lot of concerns with this. Right? In this case,
Agreed. Yeah.
the employer has a wallet, and they're the ones issuing the payment. So it's not that drastically different than a company having money in a bank account and then transferring it out. But
Mhm.
in this case, if the employer is paying people directly, that also means the employees need to provide them a wallet ID, right? And so that also means that they need to have a crypto wallet, and your average employee is probably not going to. And if they do, then like I said earlier, they could probably go ahead and just do it. So now you're asking people to go and create a MetaMask account or something like that, or an exchange like Coinbase. And in that case, maybe the employee saves a little bit in fees, and I guess maybe possibly they save one step in the process compared to buying it directly. But now I'm literally giving my employer my wallet ID. And so that means that wallet ID is now stored in an HR and payroll system and directly tracked to my name. And my employer knows that I'm the likely holder of this wallet. Otherwise, why would I be asking them to pay me there? And so many people won't like that. They could now my employer could follow the blockchain transactions if they wanted to. And so that's a non-starter to many people. And then the other even larger risk, what if I accidentally give my employer an Ethereum wallet ID for my Bitcoin wallet, right? that's going to be an issue because the payment will be lost. With
Yep. Yep.
cryptocurrencies, you don't have the same guardrails that exist with traditional fiat payments where a direct deposit can be rejected and then you just resend it. So it means that the payment will be gone on both sides. And now we talked about the risk adverse nature of payroll, and it'll be a huge issue when people will be like, hey, I never got my payment. And of course everyone wants to avoid that at all costs. But then the other option, which is more feasible, is the crypto payroll provider, right? And so this seems like the more reasonable option to accomplish this. In this case, the employer will never get the wallet ID. They just need to know how much money, or from a percentage standpoint or an amount standpoint, the employee wants to be paid, and then they can withhold that money from the regular payroll process. So I don't even need to change anything in my payroll process. I just add a new vendor. And so this would be kind of similar to what people do now with retirement accounts, right?
Yep.
So for me, contributing 10% of my 401k, the way it works now is SAP withholds that. They send it to Vanguard. And then, if I want to change my election, I can do that, and I can go look at my Vanguard account. So in this case, we keep our payroll process the same, and we're just adding a vendor and paying and withholding money in your local currency, like US dollars. So what are your thoughts and takeaways from those two methods? Do you agree with me, or do you think maybe I'm missing something?
No, I absolutely do. Right, I'm a payroll practitioner originally back in my original young career, and yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that it can get very messy and very, very confusing and very, you know, kludgy, right? Like what are my, like you said, what if I lose the key to the wallet? What if I never, get the wrong sort of connections, made for what type of Bitcoin or coin I'm using? So totally agree with you. And I think the employer wallets, it shifts a lot of the volatility, at least a portion of it, if anything, and liability onto the employers. And they've got to understand the logistical and sort of compliance related impacts of taking that on, which, as you've just detailed, I mean, even at a high level is a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the employer wallet method, for example, US employers really have to track the dollar value of the cryptocurrency at the time of the transaction, which means the value can and likely will fluctuate, and sometimes positive, sometimes negative, between the date that they send the funds or make the transaction and the actual payment date, right? Those things don't always going to reconcile from a value perspective on transmission to actual receipt. And so, I think possibly more concerning is employers can be found to have violated the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, if the
Right.
cryptocurrency volatility caused the net value to drop the employees below minimum wage thresholds, which for some employees, based on where their wages and the way these things are moving, that can get really expensive when you talk about fines and you talk about penalties, which can get, they can start to go dig into not just that employee, but your past practices and really start to find problems. So you're really opening yourself up as a business. You're exposing yourself, I think, to a lot of risk. Alternatively, to your point, there are some emerging providers that are certainly out there doing, doing this for organizations, acting as an intermediary, and they're doing it for both payroll and 401k. Bitwage is one that comes to mind. I've done a bit of work with their leadership and seen how they do it, and it is making an impact for organizations that is taking that on. I think it offers a much lower risk approach to allowing, having that intermediary involved, to facilitate, obviously at a fee, the fiat currency to crypto conversion and purchase on behalf of the employer and transfer the crypto to the employee versus, essentially taking the employer out of that sort of transaction, right? And fundamentally making sure that the subsequent risk is somewhat reduced for the employer. And certainly, look, I mean, with any of these solutions that someone is going to step into, they really ought to do their due diligence, right? They have to look into this, test it, figure it out, make sure that it is going to meet your needs and it does what it says. But I think the beauty of this is again, you remove a bit of you remove a good layer of the chaos of doing this and having to know all the ins and outs of what are very young and largely misunderstood laws right now around how this works. But know that the government is still looking at all of this from the traditional laws of the FLSA, and other, labor laws that are very important. And I think when an employer can, anytime you can engage a provider to offer an integrated solution to your HCM environment or your payroll environment, I think you're going to be better off. And ultimately, all of that risk, or much of that risk, gets taken off of you as the employer. And then the employee is really kind of taking the risk on themselves, because they're making the decision that that's how they want to sort of, again, air quotes, invest in these assets. So I have to agree with you. I would say 100%. The safest and cleanest option, the way I would describe it, is most likely that third party provider.
Right, right. And we've talked about it a number of times here, but like the legalities, and this is something that's evolving. It's going to vary, if you look at it, of course, country to country, but even within the US, state to state. When we looked at the APA session, I think their handout actually had at the state level some of the different definitions that have come out, and like
Yes.
that has an impact where you might only be able to offer it regionally, or also like if you're using a vendor, I'd say it's very important to do the appropriate due diligence on them as well. You want to make sure that they have a sustainable business model. They're someone that's trustworthy to partner with, right? If the value goes down, they're financially healthy, right? And so that's definitely something to consider. And I know at the APA in-person conference, I also talked to a vendor, and like with my job at SAP, I've had a couple conversations with a vendor, and there's actually a blog that we have that talks a little bit about some of the use cases with SAP solutions, which I'll share. But overall, my takeaway from it right now is there's a number of risks and considerations, and from talking to the payroll practitioners, they have a lot more questions than answers. And this is absolutely an area where legislation is lagging the technology by quite a bit, right? Because the technology is also evolving quite a bit. I actually recently, and I know me and you kind of talked about it before this, but we saw like a crypto native payroll platform, and like I know we exchanged some messages on that, but it's in like early beta, and honestly, I have more questions than answers for that, right? I don't know if you had some initial thoughts. I think it's super early days, and like what is that going to look like? But it's evolving quite a bit.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I will tell you that I think fintech is really, really, really aggressively attacking payroll, if you will, the industry. It's really looking to modernize it, and I'll tell you that a lot of the solutions are very tech heavy, obviously, and some of them are blockchain based, right, and digital native based. And there is a vision that this is the key to giving employees the power to sort of well, certainly enable employers to move money very quickly, but also giving employees the ability to have, these options, right, in the Web3 sort of spirit. So, yeah, no, it's going to be very interesting, and it's exciting to see this innovation coming about. And you're right. I think you've got to really kind of pace yourself along the lines of doing what is the safest right now until these laws can catch up to the innovation, and the innovation can solidify enough that people can have enough confidence and trust that this volatility is not going to be such a roller coaster ride, because it is really, really hectic right now, for sure.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, these are problems that there's a lot of people that are making it their career to kind of look into and try to figure out. So we mentioned it's super early days on this, and it's evolving quite a bit, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, and I'll certainly continue to do so.
Yep. Likewise. Likewise.
All right. Well, I think that's enough for today. Thanks so much for joining me, Pete. I appreciate you taking the time. I really enjoyed this session. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.